Welcome back to the Farm Show here on Westplex Talk 1045. I'm your host, John Combest. This is the C block. That is the third segment of our show. We're going to start off with some good news from Washington, D.C., and then a little bit more, I guess you could call it challenging insights that also took place this week. Okay, let's start off with the good news about a Missourian. A local boy, a hometown boy made good. This week, Richard Fordyce was confirmed by the U.S. Senate to become the Undersecretary of Agriculture for Farm Production and Conservation. Now, chances are, if you're involved in Missouri politics, if you're involved in Missouri agriculture, that was a Freudian slip. If you're involved in Missouri agriculture, you know the name Richard Fordyce. Most recently, Richard Fordyce served a role at OBP, the OBP agency. He was the director of ag business at OBP. Now, Mr. Fordyce has a long resume in Missouri agriculture. Prior to serving at the USDA, I should also note too, prior to being at OBP, he served as the administrator of USDA's Farm Service Agency, where he led a nationwide network of over 2,000 county and 50 state officials dedicated to supporting farmers and ranchers during historically challenging times. Before serving at the USDA, he was appointed by Missouri Governor Jay Nixon to lead the Missouri Department of Agriculture as the director, and he also served Missouri soybean farmers on the United Soybean Board. Richard and his wife, Renee, own and operate Fordyce Farms, a fourth-generation Missouri soybean, corn, and cattle farm in Harrison County. If you want to learn a little bit more about Richard Fordyce, you can go to OBP Agency. Just think Osborne, Barr, Paramore, obpagency.com, and you can look up Fordyce in the search feature and find more about Richard Fordyce. You could also check out a piece from AgriPulse. You can find that on the Friday edition of johncombest.com. So congratulations to Richard Fordyce on this honor, representing Missouri well, as he has done for so many decades in his career. Okay, the other piece of news coming from Washington, D.C. this week was, I guess you could call it a forum or a symposium, and it was brought to us via LinkedIn. That's right, of all places, LinkedIn. Now, you know, LinkedIn is generally, to steal a phrase from a former Monsanto and Bayer colleague, a cringe platform. It can be pretty cringe. Most of the updates are from people saying things like, "So humbled to be named one of the top 7,000 female leaders doing business leadership in the leadership arena of business for female business owners doing business. #BossGirl. So humbled." I usually don't think they actually know what humbled means when they do bragging like that. But even though LinkedIn can generally be a cringe platform, they have some pretty useful features. And one of them, for associations and companies, is the ability to do what's called a LinkedIn Live. So you could think of it as a virtual press conference or a virtual symposium where all you do is go to LinkedIn and folks can dial in and watch what's going on, even ask questions. It can even be interactive. And this week, there was a LinkedIn Live brought to us by the National Corn Growers Association, based right here in our broadcast area, and West St. Louis County is the headquarters. NCGA brought together some of its own top minds, as well as some outside consultants and experts, and even members of congressional staff to discuss the farm economy, discussing the status of where farmers are today, the economic realities of commodity prices, of farm input prices. One of the key pieces of news that NCGA was promoting was their most recent grower survey, in which they asked growers about the state of the farm economy, with nearly half believing the nation's farm economy is on the brink of a crisis. NCGA's chief economist, Krista Swanson, talked about those results Have a listen.
One of the findings that we wanted to highlight was that, we asked farmers about their level of concern for the current state of the farm economy, and half responded that they were very concerned. When we take that with another segment, about 75% said that they were either very or moderately concerned. Another thing that we asked was, do you think let me back up and say, we're starting to hear talks of the word crisis and farm crisis being used. And we asked farmers, do you feel like the United States is on the brink of a farm crisis? And again, about half of those surveyed said yes, they do think that, and 80% believe that the United States is on the brink of a farm crisis or may be on the brink of a farm crisis. And taking this another step, asking farmers about their level of concern for their farm financials, 2/3 said that they are more concerned than they were a year ago. I think also telling is that only a few percent said that they were less concerned compared to a year ago. So clearly that leaves also about a third that said that they had the same level of concern as a year ago, which may also be heightened concern if we think about the growing situation in that last year there was also some concern among farmers.
Swanson notes there's one particularly large area in which growers are considering holding off on purchases.
One of the other things that we asked in this survey was if farmers were thinking about changes for next year. And the top response on that was holding off on making equipment purchases. And that's not surprising because that's not a must-need item on the farm. If you're going to grow a crop, you have to buy the seed to plant the crop. Equipment can last anywhere from a couple years to many, many years. So that would be the first place that farmers might make changes is not surprising. But I want to just point out that when we think about farmers making those types of changes, sometimes we talk about when the farm economy is doing well, there's this positive ripple effect throughout the economy. And alternatively, when the farm economy is suffering, there's this negative ripple effect. And so if farmers are making cutbacks on equipment purchases, then that impacts local retailers, it impacts the companies who make that machinery, it impacts the people who have those jobs. And so you start to see this ripple effect throughout the economy.
Swanson noted another input farmers are considering cutting back on.
Another thing that farmers mentioned was reducing fertilizer applications. Farmers normally keep their soil fertility strong because it's good for the soil health and also productivity of the crop. That's a change that farmers can make maybe for a year. They could potentially cut back, especially if they have high levels, but it's not a long-term solution. It's not something that they can continue to do. So, these findings really point to a once-in-a-generation problem for the ag economy. The survey findings suggest that the crisis could have long reach, affecting every area of the economy. And farmers may be less likely to make purchases and will make budget cuts that can affect their local communities too.
Leslie Weber McNitt, who is the Vice President of Public Policy for NCGA, asked Ms. Swanson what's causing the hardships for farmers. Here's their exchange.
Just reflecting back on my better part of 2 decades advocating on food and agriculture issues and working with farmers, I've been feeling a greater sense of anxiety and concern and urgency, but I think that the survey really puts a finer point on that sentiment. What are some of the factors that are causing this financial hardship among farmers?
Yeah, so there's a number of different factors that are affecting the financial hardship right now. I would say one really simple way to break it down is just that the cost to produce corn and other commodity crops is a lot higher than the price that farmers can get, or the revenue that farmers can generate by selling that crop, which leaves farmers in a deficit situation. For 2025, the projected difference between the cost to grow an acre of corn and the returns that an average farmer can get by selling the national average bushels at the national average price is $170 per acre loss. That is a loss for the 3rd year in a row. Each of those 3 years, that loss value has gotten larger. Collectively, if you add up those 3 years, that is the largest cumulative 3-year net loss going all the way back as far as the data set goes to 1975. So I think that's really significant. So then why are we in this situation? What's driving some of those dynamics? First of all, the U.S. is expected to produce a record 16.8 billion bushel corn crop this year. That's driven by yields that are higher than the current record yield by over 7 bushels an acre. We're looking at 186.7 bushel per acre national average, and we planted the most corn acres since the 1930s. So a lot of dynamics adding up to not only major productivity increases, but also large corn acres this year. We're looking at a big crop, and not only is the U.S. Going to produce a record crop, but globally, we're looking at a record corn production as well. So that is just a lot of corn. Adding on to the supply side, on the demand side, demand has been strong. We've actually just finished up a marketing year with record demand levels, and that includes strong demand from our segments, our top 3 segments of feed, ethanol, and exports. So just the fact that we have a record demand situation, but supply that is exceeding that level is putting some downward pressure on prices.
Swanson also acknowledged the other side of the equation, which are costs.
The farm cost of production is really high right now, and it has been exceptionally high since 2022. The cost to grow an acre of corn increased 26% from 21 to 22, and for some context, on average, the average annual increase going back to 1975 is about 3% a year. So that would be the normal average increase, and we're talking about a big jump. And then costs have stayed about the same since then. That jump was largely driven by fertilizer, which is a big cost component for corn growers, but really it included some increases across all different cost categories. One other thing I want to mention is that I talked about how costs jumped in 2022, have stayed about the same since then. For 2025, the average cost to grow an acre of corn is about 3% lower than 2022. But in 2022, farmers had the opportunity, the nearby futures contract was over $8 at one point in 2022, and it has mostly been on a downward trajectory since then, and in the past month has been below $4. So we're talking about a greater than 50% decrease in futures price. At the same time, costs have remained about the same. And so that really, I think, illustrates this growing strain and the fact that where we are today is the result of several years of high costs and declining prices.
Leslie Weber McNitt asked President Kenneth Hartman about solutions. Here's their exchange.
I mentioned earlier the solutions-oriented approach of NCGA. And you're a farmer, you're also the head honcho, right, this organization. So can you talk a little bit about what NCGA is doing to help farmers, and what are some of those solutions that we're asking policymakers to do to help?
Well, NCGA has always looked at here the last couple of years, and for a long time, it's all about markets. It's about creating demand. It's about grinding corn. That's what we need to do. And there's opportunities to do this. One of the opportunities right now that we're in DC right now, E15. It's all about E15, higher blends of ethanol. Domestically, we need to get this. And my frustration is when I start looking at other countries, Brazil's at 30% ethanol. Japan's looking at going to 20% ethanol. We've got other countries that are, we're hearing India's wanting to go to higher blends of ethanol. Why are we sitting here at a 10% ethanol and other countries are going with higher blends of ethanol, but yet we have all this corn that we can use domestically? And not only, the other frustration with this when I think about it is, ethanol is a win-win-win. It's a win for the environment. We know it's environmentally clean. It helps the environment. At the same time, it's a win for the consumer. In Waterville, Illinois, where I live, we have a flex fuel station right now that's E15 is 40 cents cheaper than regular 87 octane E10. So, consumers right now with the country, when we talk about the inflation and where we're at, this would be a way to help that. And also, it's a win for farmers because we've got the grain. So this is where we're obviously going right now and working on E15, but at the same time, we're also looking at working with trade agreements. We're hoping, working with the Trump administration. We feel like it's another place where we can expand our market. So it's all about markets. It's about grinding corn.
And Krista Swanson noted a study done in conjunction with the Renewable Fuels Association.
We published a study looking at the economic impact of E15 and what it would look like when fully adopted. And Kenny talked about ethanol being a win-win-win, and so I'll just say it's a win-win-win-win and add another win onto the end of that, because he didn't talk about the economy, but the economy could also benefit from this, and that is what our study showed. Looked at year-round permanent access nationwide to E15 could provide an extra $26 billion in economic activity. That's greater contribution to GDP, support 128,000 additional jobs, providing an extra $10 billion in income to those people working in those jobs. The breakdown on that, $26 billion to GDP, 7.3 billion of that would be due to ethanol production, and actually over half, 13.8 billion, would be from that extra corn to produce the ethanol. And this study actually just looked at the impacts of corn going into the ethanol, the portion of corn that would be used in ethanol. But the other corn is going to benefit too from greater demand for corn and higher price across the whole sector, and that's not even captured in these numbers. So I think that's important to note too.
All right, once again, that was National Corn Growers. You can find them on YouTube by searching for National Corn Growers, and this particular forum was called Corn Conversations: The State of the Farm Economy. You've been listening to The Farm Show. That's Farm and Ranch, Missouri, here on Westplex Talk 104.5. Thanks so much for joining us this week. You can always join us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Farm Show Radio. We'll see you next Saturday at 10 a.m.